Well, we've officially reached the part of the season where Drew introduces his video with the line, "Can you believe there's only 3 games left in the season?" It feels like it was just yesterday we were previewing this team and wondering who the players might be and wondering what might happen in a year one under Mike Elko. Look, the season's already over. But I can now add the line, but Texas A&M controls their own destiny with 3 games left. I know. I start probably 3 videos a year or live streams with that notion that, oh my goodness, the football season has flown by. But when in recent history have we gotten this far into the season with everything still to play for? That feels pretty good. It doesn't feel pretty good to be coming off of a loss. It doesn't feel pretty good having to sit on a loss through a bye week. But we got to enjoy some football this last week, and we got to enjoy the downfall of LSU football. It's always fun to see the kiddies down the road take a loss, take a stumble. After you beat them on the year, now they're going to try to get their revenge and everything next year. That's their right, but this is our year versus LSU, and it's clearly not their year. It was fun to see Georgia fall, and it was really cool to see the SEC landscape narrow down to where there are 3 one-loss teams left in the conference. It's Tennessee, it's Texas, it's Texas A&M. 2 of those teams play. I don't have to tell you which 2. So you really just got to sit back and reflect on the loss, especially the team. 3 practices, couple days off, back to game week this week. They're refreshed. They're ready to go. So I wanted to take this time to talk about this last chapter of the football season. You got 3 games left. You're in the fourth quarter. 25% of your season's left. What are A&M's chances of making the postseason? What does A&M have to do offensively? What is life without Le'Veon Moss? Is Chase Bisontis going to come back? Defensively, tackling has been the issue in A&M losses. Can they fix that? Are we doomed? Are we screwed? I want to talk about just kind of the big picture going forward. And yes, we're going to talk postseason. We've been talking postseason already at the start of this video. A&M has freaking earned the right to talk about it. A&M has put themselves in the discussion. A&M has gone on and won a bunch of conference games and only lost 1, and you're still alive. So we talk about it. Elko mentioned it today. He's talked about winning you're in, talked about that whole notion. We know the case, so we're going to bring it up and, add a little bit of fluff to it because we're fans and that's what we do. But we're just going to take the temperature of the team, project this team forward, see where we're at. It's a great time to do it. You just had a bye week. You got 3 games left. So thank you guys for being here. Like and subscribe. It helps me greatly. We're going to keep doing this. Took a little break last week. We're back for the home stretch of the season. We'll be going live this week, Thursday, previewing the New Mexico State game, but really just kind of previewing this last chapter of the season. I'm going to give you guys a chance to call in, give your score prediction for that game for a chance to enter the Hall of Fame. But I really want to hear your thoughts about this team entering the home stretch because that's really what's really important, and that's what this week kind of signifies. You got to beat New Mexico State. You got to play your best, but we're really just kind of looking at this as a transition phase into this last stretch of the year. So thank you guys for being here. Let's start with A&M's playoff chances. It's pretty clear. You win 3 games, you're in the playoff. Technically, you can win 2. You can lose to New Mexico State, still make the SEC championship, but we're not doing that. You win 3 games and you're in. How do you feel about the team? How do you feel about heading to Auburn on a just recently announced primetime kickoff night game at Jordan-Hare Stadium? I know we bitched and moaned for years about getting a bunch of noon slots. Now you're having a good football season. You're getting the primetime slots. So we got to embrace it. You're going on the road. You're playing a night game. Bad year for Auburn. Still not a game that you can just look past. A very serious game. And make no mistake, for A&M, that Auburn game is a playoff game. Every conference game is from now on. The game versus Texas is certainly a playoff game. And you could even argue that it's an elimination game for both teams, even though Texas has 1 loss and A&M has 2 losses. Because what is Texas's best win on the year? It's Vandy, maybe Michigan, maybe Oklahoma. Not a great resume. Their resume is dying for a really big win. So if you come out of the year and you're a 10-2 Texas team, you lost to A&M, you lost to Georgia, your 2 toughest opponents on the year, and you're being measured against other 10-2 SEC teams like an Alabama, an Ole Miss. Hell, even throw Missouri back in there in this case. Going in with that resume is like bringing a knife to a gunfight, man. You're not going to get by with a Michigan and a Vandy unless you get help. There's still a path if Texas gets help that they could do it. But it really makes things uncomfortable for them. And obviously for A&M, you don't win that game. You're a 3-loss regular season team. you're not making the playoff most likely. There are really, really far-fetched scenarios where A&M can still make it into the SEC championship game because they're only going to have 2 conference losses in that scenario. They could still make it in. Very unlikely. Plus, in that case, if you're a 3-loss SEC championship team, you lose that game. You're a 4-loss team. You're probably not making the playoff. But that leads me to this next area of discussion that a lot of people have been kind of debating, going back and forth on. Let's get crazy. Let's say you make the SEC championship game. What happens if you lose that game? Does a 10-3 SEC championship game runner-up make the college football playoff? I'm going to ask you guys this question because there seems to be a lot of debate on the topic. I have been operating under the fact, or under the, presumption, the assumption that, yeah, a 10-3 SEC championship game loser absolutely makes the playoff, because I don't think the committee, or more specifically the NCAA, can afford to do something that the SEC would perceive as wronging them. Are you going to devalue the SEC championship game by saying this team gets penalized for playing in this game? What would the domino effects of such a decision be? What happens if you say it might be better for you just to avoid that SEC championship game? That's a scary avenue for the NCAA to go down. An NCAA that's obviously dwindled in power over the last few years. We know what's going on with the NCAA. Very much in flux, very much a lot of moving parts in the college football landscape. This would throw a massive wrench in that whole discussion. So I would lean towards that not being the case. I would lean towards you being a lock if you make the SEC championship game virtually. Now, get blown out in the game, you open the door, whatever, don't get blown out in the game. In most scenarios, an SEC championship game loser, and for that matter, a Big Ten championship game loser, should make the college football playoff. But I want to hear from you guys. Are you fearful of putting a 10-3 resume into the hands of a committee that has once screwed over Texas A&M in 2020? I want to hear from you. I've heard a lot of different takes from different Aggies. It just seems like it could be a final straw. It just seems like it could be the start of a further division between the conferences and the NCAA. And I don't think the NCAA would even want to knock on that door. We'll see, because there's probably going to be a 10-2 SEC championship game loser. That's very much on the table. Not guaranteed. Tennessee or Texas could have something to say with that, but there's a good chance there is. We'll find out about what they're thinking in that regard. But more saliently, more importantly, what are A&M's chances of actually winning out in this thing? Obviously, we just talked about the Auburn game. That's a tough environment. Obviously, that Texas game, it's going to have a personality of its own. I don't care what each team looks like going into that game. You're obviously hoping for the best leading into it, but that game, to me, has always existed in a vacuum. Here's what A&M is dealing with. Coming out of that South Carolina game, the headline, if you're talking about negative things about A&M coming out of a game, would be tackling, right? 25 missed tackles in the game, 23 quarterback pressures, 0 sacks. Tackling was the defining statistic, the defining aspect of that game to most coming out of it. Is it weird that I come out of the game significantly more apprehensive about the offense than the defense? Obviously, you lost Le'Veon Moss, and I'll just take a second. I talked about it twice last week. You couldn't feel worse for the kid. It's a kid that we've really enjoyed watching, his on-field development, but also him off the field in press conferences. Just a really cool guy. Really just not full of himself. Almost like a authentic humility about him. He really just be balling. It sucks to see it for him, and it also obviously sucks for the team, and he accounted for so much of your offense. Now, I've been saying it. I have no doubts that Amari Daniels can be a lead SEC back for Texas A&M. We've seen his growth, and I actually had him as one of my breakout players on the team this year in a rotational role, though, not in a starter role. I'm talking like an 800-yard year. I'm not talking about a bust onto the scene 1,500-yard back. I'm talking about within his role, a breakout quality backup running back. Now he's being thrust into the start position. And we talked about the midpoint of the year, how Amari still had another step to take in terms of patience and anticipation and following his blocks and trusting his offensive linemen. And I think for the most part, we've seen really, really good progression over the last 3 games. Versus LSU, we absolutely saw it. Versus Mississippi State, we definitely saw it. Not a great statistical game, but in his carries, he looked really, really good. And I think we're on a really positive trajectory with Amari Daniels. Now, here's the thing. Are you going to wrap him in bubble wrap? How much are you willing to play him? Do you want him to get lead back reps knowing that you only have one scholarship running back behind him? It's EJ Smith. And I think where you really feel the blow of losing Le'Veon, I mean, it sucks to lose Le'Veon as your lead guy, but I think Amari's going to be good in the role. You lose that 1-2 punch because EJ Smith has not been great on the year, unfortunately. Now, that's in very limited carries. Now, my hope would be that knowing he's in a bigger role, knowing he's going to get more reps, more shots in that Russian roulette, gun, maybe he has a chance to find some success. But we haven't seen it. We've seen him kind of try to make it all up on plays. We've seen him kind of just run without too much direction, kind of just, all out sprint from the moment he gets the ball and kind of running into defensive players, into piles. Time to breathe. Time to understand that you're the guy. You're a backup running back for Texas A&M. That might as well be a starting role because a backup running back is such an important piece to a team. That's the big hope, is that EJ really takes that step forward. Elko talked about how there are other options, though. There is another. Is it Le'Veon Moss? I mean, is it not Le'Veon Moss? Is it Terry Bussey? I think that's the obvious choice, right? If you're going to have a third running back enter that rotation, you would think it's the kid that's been on offense and who's actually received carries out of the backfield so far on the year. He's received several end-arounds. Like I said, he's been motioned into the backfield and received carries that way. I don't think he's actually started a play at running back. I think every time he's received the ball, it's been through motion. But he's been there. He's seen the offense. He knows the offensive play calls. That's the natural choice, I think. Now, if you want to get really speculative, Dalton Brooks played some running back. Javen Thomas played some running back. I think Bravion Rogers played some running back. Now, I could see moving someone over. I really don't think it would be Dalton Brooks. Like I said, Dalton Brooks has superstar potential. I know he's had a couple of rough games, but I think Dalton Brooks is a guy that you want to get the maximum out of on defense where he's playing at safety right now. I don't want to move him from there. I wouldn't. Maybe they're thinking they can in a limited capacity. Javen Thomas is an option. Bravion Rogers is actually a great option because he's been playing really hard in special teams. So for me, I think it's like an 85% Le'Veon Moss and then like 10% it could be Bravion Rogers and then 5% the field. It could be someone else. Bussey, been called undersized. He's a $190. I think he's a little bit bigger than he gets credit for. He's shown some good ability running between the tackles. Had a really good 10-yard run through contact, I think, versus Florida. Had a couple of runs through contact versus Missouri. Now, he got licked on that play at the end of it, but he gained yardage. I think as a spell guy, a situational guy, maybe a 7-8 reps per game kind of running back, I think Terry Bussey's the guy, but we'll see what they do. Elko also talked about the possibility of just leaning on the quarterback in the passing game more, which I think you're going to have to see this offense do. Versus South Carolina, I maintain the fact that I think Marcel Reed played a fine game. Obviously wasn't great. Obviously didn't elevate the team into winning. But I think he operated the offense well. I still love the poise. I love the demeanor. I love how he gets the team in and out of sets and formations and plays. He does really well for that as a true freshman, a redshirt freshman. He didn't have great protection in the game, so it's really hard to get a full gauge of his capabilities in that scenario. Now, South Carolina, probably the best pass rush you'll see the rest of the year, but Texas is not far behind them. It's going to be a similar look, and Texas probably has the better secondary and linebacker crew. South Carolina just probably has the pure rushing ability, but Texas is probably a better overall defense, I would say. Maybe you guys can argue with me there. I'd love for you to talk it down. I would love for you to prove me wrong, but you got another test coming up. You're going to need Chase Basantis back because we saw in that game, I'm sure he'd tell you, Colino Feyu played a bad game. Got beat a lot. And at that left guard spot where you normally have Chase Basantis, tons of leakage and miscommunications between those two. Center, left guard. Pressure there all night, and that's on top of constant penetration on the outside where the quarterback did a good job of stepping up early in the game. That kind of went away because you were breaking down on the interior of the O-line. Now, stepping up obviously gives your tackles a little bit extra leverage against those really lightning fast edge rushers that South Carolina has. But if the interior starts breaking down, then you're screwed. So late in the game, you actually had opportunities to go on drives, and you were in plus territory. I think you got to the 30. But back-to-back sacks set you into a 4th and 20 when the game was 20-30. You punt the ball away. That was basically the white flag. The game was over. Pressure forced some bad passes. He had a beautiful corner route to Noah Thomas that if he just delivers an accurate ball, big 40-yard gain. Guy in his face, right in his face, can't deliver the accurate ball, incomplete. So he needs help. He's obviously a quarterback working through things. He's not going to be an elite Johnny Manziel right now. I still prefer him over Connor Wigman right now. I still like the demeanor. I still like the operation. It's really going to be about how this offensive staff finds offense, how they make up for 750 and 10 touchdowns that you lost with Le'Veon Moss. Where do you find that? Where do you add on top of that? Because obviously you weren't even good enough with Moss. I mean, Moss barely played in the game, so I guess that's not really a great argument. But where do you find offense? I want to see them move Marcel Reed out of the backfield. I don't see a lot of rollout boot type of plays in this offense right now. I want to see him with that option to move and extend plays. I want to see that happen more often. I want to see screen plays. You want to get Terry Bussey the ball in creative ways. You want to get Jabari Barber, who actually is getting much more involved, the ball in more creative ways. Now, it's not only his fault. I'm talking about Colin Klein. It's also a year one, and it's obvious, and it's a known fact that it's harder for an offense to be a clicking unit in a year one. But now, coming off this bye with 3 games left, I'm ready to see the best offense, at least from a scheme standpoint, that we've seen all year. I want to see more deep shots. We're not seeing a lot of shots lately. I want to see this stuff. I want to see the next evolution of the offense. And I don't want you to get it twisted. I have no ill favor towards Colin Klein right now. It's a year one. It's a transition year. You're having a quarterback shuffle. We obviously are not elite at receiver. You just lost, your leading running back, and you lost your backup running back before the year started. Tough hand to be dealt. But now that you have everything to fight for, I want to see the fight out of this coaching staff and see what they have to offer. I'm excited to see it. I trust them. I think we're going to see some really good stuff to close the year out offensively. I just talked myself into it. I'm expecting fireworks, man. I don't know. I don't need fireworks. I'd be good with, a Roman candle. So let's see what happens. Defensively, I mean, you had 2 games this year where you didn't tackle well. Notre Dame and South Carolina. You've also lost 2 football games this year. Notre Dame and South Carolina. Those are the 2 games you didn't tackle well. Did I mention you lost those games? It was tackling, man. 25 missed tackles, 23 quarterback pressures, 0 sacks. Lenore Sellers played a great game. Where the hell did that come from? We've seen spurts of that, and he just went Superman mode. But at least tackled him a couple times. Look, like I said beginning this offense-defense discussion, I don't leave this game in a rut or fearful of the worst for this defense. I really like this defense. I really like the progression we've seen in the secondary. We all obviously love this defensive line. We all love the progression we've seen at linebacker. They had a really bad game. So you need to figure out what exactly led you to playing like that. Was it coming off of the emotional game versus LSU? There is data to indicate that leads to bad performances. But how do you get past that? How do you flush the toilet and move on to the next session? How do you do that? I'm leaning on leaders here, man, and it really starts with Torin York. I'm looking at Shamar Turner to really clean stuff up. It's been game after game of personal fouls. He knows better, and he's a really freaking good player, but 15-yard penalties can destroy drives. If we get 3 clean games from Shamar, I'll be really proud of him because it's obviously a habit at this point, and it's really hard for him to shake. And don't get me wrong. I like a mean, nasty, vicious defensive lineman, defensive tackle. That's what you need. You got to be sneakier, man. You can't go headbutt a quarterback. You can't hit players late. You can't do some of these things, man. I'm looking at the leaders on this team. I'm looking at Bryce Anderson, who also, I think the safeties had a pretty bad game. I think the fits of the safeties and the linebackers were pretty bad in the game. And then just tackling, man. So, Torin York, Bryce Anderson, Shamar Turner, Nick Scorton, Will Lee, Albert Regis, Cassius Howell, your upperclassmen. We talked about going into the game how you needed to have the right mindset to tackle giant human beings in Rocket Sanders and Lenora Sellers, and they obviously didn't have that. Now, you won't see those bodies again, but can you be even better from having that performance? That's the hope. Like I said, I'm not making huge philosophical changes defensively. I'm not changing schematics. I'm not benching players. I love this personnel. You can't have that kind of a game because the evidence is there. Those are the games you freaking lose. But guys, what are your thoughts offensively, defensively? And then what do you think of a 10-3 SEC championship game loser? Those are the 3 questions I ask you guys in the comments. You can answer one or all of them. It's up to you. Thanks for watching, guys. Like I said, I'll see you Thursday. I just wanted to give my quick thoughts going into the last stretch of the season. Shorter 20-minute video. Thank you guys for being here. I'll see you soon. Gig 'em.